What is typically a routine financial assessment of any ballot initiative has become politically charged in the battle over Amendment 4, and it could be politically consequential as well. To talk about what the financial statement says and what it means, we're joined by Dr. Nancy Staats, Vice President of the Jacksonville National Organization for Women. Welcome, Dr. Staats.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Daniel Cronrath, Dr. Daniel Cronrath, Political Science Professor at Florida State College at Jacksonville. Welcome.
Thanks, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Daniel, the state does financial statements for all of its amendments, typically a fairly boilerplate process. First of all, this is required by law. Tell us about that requirement and why this particular instance of this financial assessment seems different.
Yeah, typically with every one of the amendments that are put on, whether they're put on by the legislature or whether they're put on by citizen initiative, they're going to be measured by a committee in Tallahassee, which is supposed to be apolitical, rarely is apolitical any longer because of the nature of our partisan politics, both nationally and in Florida, of course. But the whole idea is to give the voter, when they go in, an idea of what they're voting for to amend the Florida Constitution. Where will there be a significant fiscal impact? Sometimes you'll even see no fiscal impact as the result of it because it's something that would not have a monetary consequence. Okay, what we're seeing with Amendment 4, at least in my opinion, is not a financial impact statement, but an editorialization and a very, very political one. Basically, you're putting the amendment. Obviously, everybody who is behind the Amendment 4 campaign, the Vote Yes for 4 campaign, we know what the legislation says. It's very, very basic. It's basically, at least from what I understand, going back to the Casey versus Planned Parenthood standard, that that abortion prior to viability of the child would be legal in the state of Florida and available for everybody. The language which is contained to, like I said before, which is very much political language, talking about that somehow, federal funding or state funding would be used to perform an abortion, or somehow that this would create abortion in which I'm sure that Dr. Staats can talk to at greater length. It's really kind of nonsensical. And then the whole idea of like speculating what the cost of future lawsuits may be. Well, I mean, who has that crystal ball? Like who knows what's going to come down the pike that you're going to be including that kind of language? And I think finally, Ian, the thing that probably disturbs me the most is that Floridians enjoy this opportunity to have direct democracy. Not every state in the United States has the ability to do ballot initiatives like we do. And the whole idea that the legislature and that the governor, once again, is going to try to not post the election. Now they're going to try to preemptively determine what the outcome is going to be.
Well, let's talk about the process here a little bit. So there's something, as you mentioned, the Financial Impact Estimating Conference, and they meet to draft this financial impact statement. It's something that is required for any ballot initiative. And the makeup of appointee changes, but it is an appointed board that does have some political, inclinations. Mm-hmm. Nancy, remind us what about Amendment 4, what it provides and how it came into being in the first place.
So, as you may or may not recall, Amendment 4 was born once the 15-week abortion ban came into play. That was May, I believe, of 2023. And literally, the people of Florida decided we need to get a ballot initiative on this because we knew that the 6-week ban was imminent after that. So there was in excess of 1.2 million or so petitions gathered in order to qualify to put this on the ballot. It is an extremely straightforward amendment. It explicitly removes any changes to the parental consent portion of abortion. And after going before the Supreme Court, it was decided this language was appropriate and could be placed on our ballot.
And so the language says, except as provided in Article 10, Section 22, no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. So this statement, this amendment will be accompanied by this financial statement. And I just want to read a little bit about that because it includes their assessment. This Financial Impact Estimating Committee determined, it says there's uncertainty about whether the amendment will require the state to subsidize abortions with public funds. They concluded that it will negatively impact the state budget if it's approved. and it would result in an increase in abortions that could negatively affect the growth of the state and local revenues over time. That's a lot to calculate. But in part, Daniel, they're looking at other states where there has been a financial impact of some kind or an anticipated financial impact of some kind with a change in abortion laws. And I think particularly one of the commissioners cited what's happening in Michigan, where there's been a push to fund through Medicaid, required abortions. So they're calculating that.
Well, sure, but you're not allowed to use federal dollars for abortion. I mean, that's been on the books in Washington, D.C. for a very, very long time. I think the big issue here is that if you consider those arguments and what you just raised in terms of people who are opposed to Amendment 4, then that is for a private group to put that out in private literature or to basically push against the individuals who want to get 4 passed. There's an open, competition of ideas in our political landscape. You are very, very welcome to vote no on 4 if you choose to vote no on 4. What the real problem is here is to put it right on the ballot and basically lay out in very, very loose terms a lot of things, again, which are very hypothetical. We don't know if these things are going to play out. We let the voter decide. We let the citizens put this on the ballot to begin with. Let the voters decide without what at least to my way of thinking, is very much political rhetoric designed to defeat the bill, to defeat the amendment.
And so, politically speaking, I mean, this is your wheelhouse. How do you anticipate that it will impact a voter at the polls?
What's very interesting, some people are going to go in there and they're going to see the language and they may be confused. In my experience, whenever you've had an issue, which, again, I think the last time I looked at public polling, this is somewhere like right around the 59%, 60% threshold, so it's going to be very, very close. Sometimes decisions like this have the opposite effect because it's really going to energize the people who are for Amendment 4. They're going to realize that what's taking place is not only do they want to vote for 4, but they recognize the unfairness of this process, trying to deliberately influence the electorate prior to the vote. I think at the end of the day, there's going to be other things. A lot of people have speculated, will Amendment 4 and will Amendment 3 actually have down ballot pressure at the top?
Remind us what 3 is.
The legalization of marijuana. These
Okay.
are the two big high-profile things. I think, however, we can't ignore the national politics going on right now, too. What will Vice President Harris, now becoming the nominee for the Democratic Party? We've already seen a surge in Democratic activism. We've already seen a massive surge in Democratic fundraising. I think that when you're looking at Democrats who are typically pro-choice, they believe in abortion rights, I think that this could actually be a top-down ballot aid to Amendment 4.
Nancy, how do you anticipate this will impact voters? Is it seen widely by people who support the amendment that this will hurt its chances? It needs 60% of the voters to approve it to become law.
It is a high threshold, Ann, higher than any other state. Most states are at 50%. What I would say is I'd love to get back away from the speculating and into the actual facts of how abortion bans affect all of us. And Floridians are smart enough to know this is the real facts are that states with very strict abortion bans have higher maternal mortality. We're seeing it in Texas already. We've seen a 13% increase in infant mortality in Texas. We see lawsuits in states with severe restrictions against the state because of lack of access. So to speculate that there will be, as Daniel said, a change in the federal funding or the state funding, like this legislature is going to pass that, does anybody really believe that? Floridians are smart. They're going to see that this for exactly what it is. They have calculated huge what-ifs without looking at the actual costs.
Well, we're talking about a new financial impact statement that's going to accompany Amendment 4 on the November ballot. I've got a couple of calls I want to get to, but first a comment from Brian on X. He says that reeks of desperation on the part of opponents. Also, it assumes that abortion services aren't covered by insurance and are more expensive than, say, heart surgery or chemotherapy. Charles on the West Side. Good morning, Charles. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good. Yeah, good morning. Question I had is, can we send out some sort of a mailer to the registered voters and also a TV ad campaign that answers or addresses this language in real simple terms, saying, hey, folks, it's a manipulative trick, don't fall for it kind of deal?
Well, Charles, good question. I mean, there obviously are going to be a lot of resources put behind Amendment 4, not just from people inside this state, but nationwide. It's a big issue.
Well, sure. And I would say to the caller, I would say, Charles, I mean, I would be, at this point in time, the last time I looked at the fundraising, I think the folks who are in favor of Amendment 4 have raised $20 million. You're going to see that, probably seeing that, Charles, if you're a super voter in your mailbox coming up to the election day. That very kind of disinformation that you're asking be dispelled. I would be stunned if that wasn't going to be, especially as we get closer to the November election. I mean, I know that our politics feels like it's moving very, very quickly, but we're still just at the end of the July. And I think as you get closer to September and October, that you're going to be seeing all kinds of literature. As a matter of fact, I just saw an ad the other day for Amendment 3 already starting up, from the individuals who want to legalize cannabis in the state of Florida. So, I mean, I think Dr. Staats would probably be better, equipped to talk about what the plan would be if there is a plan. But, certainly you're going to be able to see a lot of counter information to what they're attempting to do.
And we should say, we're covering local elections that are pertinent to the August 20th primary. We'll be covering all of the ballot initiatives closer to November when those will be voted on. But this very issue is timely because this financial impact statement was just approved. Nancy, it seems a little bit ironic because the supporters of Amendment 4 were in fact the ones that pushed for a revised financial summary. I mean, there had been a financial summary in place. After the 6-week ban went into effect in May, they said the financials have changed. We should have an updated statement. And that's what opened the door for this one that they now have take issue with.
Correct. It does feel like a retribution, frankly. This, as your other guest has pointed out, this should be a straightforward calculation. There is no mystery to what this costs to have the previous circumstances reinstated. We have years of precedent. Prior to the ban, we had almost 50 years of abortion legal through viability. So we know exactly what it costs. It's not that much, especially when you consider the cost in maternal mortality, infant mortality, the drop in medical residents coming to our state, to say nothing of health care and medical care for mothers with problems or babies with problems or foster care. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but this very myopic view of the cost is based on just fantasies.
And also, too, I think the thing that's just stunning is the number of people who will then engage in self-harm in order to terminate their own pregnancy rather than having it safe and legal and available.
Exactly.
Women have been terminating pregnancies for thousands of years in all kinds of ways which are disastrous to their own bodies. And I think that's another consequence that we need to look at, as you suggested, beyond just the simple finances.
That's a great point.
So we know that these meetings were contentious. They lasted many, many hours over several days of discussions. The Amendment 4 supporters had proposed language that would have said the amendment will, quote, result in decreased costs to state government with no impact to local government revenues or costs and an overall positive impact to the state budget. Nancy, were those arguments that you're discussing in terms of the cost of infant mortality or viability, for infant mortality or maternal mortality raised as potential costs?
So I'm not familiar with what they based those arguments on, but I think any rational thinking person can accept the fact that the cost to the state, who does not pay for abortions, and the federal funds can be used when it's cases of rape or incest or the life of the mother, which is not frequent. So we're not paying for them. The idea that paying for potentially a child up to 18 years or a complicated pregnancy, it pales in comparison. And this is, again, just fallacy.
We've got a call from Rick on the north side. Good morning, Rick. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I just want to ask a just simple question. Hypothetically, if both bills pass with yes on 3 and 4, in layman term, what does that actually mean? That'll be my question. If both bills are passed with yes, what does it actually mean? Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Well, that's a really good question, Rick. One of the things that we've also seen in the past is we've had amendments pass in Florida that after the fact, they've actually tried to manipulate the outcome of the amendment. The restoration of felon voting rights is the first one that comes to my mind when we got rid of the whole idea of having to go to Tallahassee and beg for clemency to get your voting rights back if you had been released from prison for a nonviolent crime after 5 years. And then they decided that even though this was not in the language of the amendment, that individuals had to completely pay their restitution prior to getting their voting back. That's not what the Florida voters approved. That's not what it said in the amendment language. So I am sure after the fact, we've already heard the governor say things like he's opposed to Amendment 4, obviously because he's very, very pro-life and his constituency's pro-life. He's very, very opposed to legalized marijuana because he's concerned that the language isn't specific enough with how to regulate it. So I think that after the fact, you're still going to see, even if the voters go and both of these amendments pass, I think you're still going to see potential manipulation. And let's be honest about this, too. Governor DeSantis has never stopped running for president. A lot of these issues that he's still pushing are very popular with his base because he has designs to run in 2028. And I think that's some of what we're seeing. And that's why they're being so aggressive with it.
We've got a message from Melissa on Facebook. She says, "This is horrible. Amendment 4 will kill women and children. No to 4. This ballot initiative is circumventing legislation. It's only 2 sentences. It allows abortion for any reason, for even minors, all the way up to birth. Talk about that." Nancy.
This Amendment 4 does not allow for abortion up until the time of birth. I was a practicing anesthesiologist for almost 30 years. I've worked in hospitals, clinics, many, many different circumstances. There has never been an elective termination of a child that is viable. The reason we use viable, meaning able to live outside the womb, the reason we use the term viable is there are sadly some pregnancies which are never viable. And so to arbitrarily give a week really diminishes the medical facts that we're trying to use when making decisions. So there was a recent case of a woman who had a child with an encephalocele, which is when the brain, part of the brain develops outside the skull, which has about a 10% survival rate, however, not long-term and mostly with a lot of disabilities. She could not terminate her pregnancy. She was in Texas. She sued. And the problem is by forcing women to carry that pregnancy to term, it could affect her long-term fertility and her life. And what have we gained? What have we gained? This goes against every bone in my medical doctor body to help people and to prevent pain and suffering. So if you care about life, you should care about the life on both sides of the placenta.
And I think there's been a lot of political effort as well to really look at the abortion scenario, and you'll hear a lot of really, really conservative individuals, I mean, literally using the word infanticide relative to abortion rights. And as Nancy has said, that's just so not the case.
I do want to go back, though, to Melissa's question about, this allows for abortion for any reason. Is there any reason that there should be no reasons applied to this law? I would say abortion opponents probably think that there's certain circumstances that they would accept abortion legality and others that they wouldn't.
So what this amendment states is that abortion is legal for those aged 18 and older, or for those 17 and younger with parental consent, up until the point of viability. And that's exactly what we had for nearly 50 years. And it really didn't cause a lot of problems. So we don't have to speculate about what if. And in fact, in half our country, that is the law of the land, that it is legal until viability. And it's the states that are pushing these extreme bans that are losing out on young employees. They don't want to come here to a state that has these extreme bans. And young residents in medicine, they don't want to risk losing their license after spending 10 years getting trained up. And now you tell me I can't treat this woman who's got premature rupture of membranes at 19 weeks, and I have to decide, am I going to risk my future? It is so short-sighted, and politicians do not understand the ramifications of these kind of broad laws.
Yeah, and I think just to restate it, just in a different way, if your 14-year-old or if your 15-year-old were to get pregnant and were to want an abortion, this Amendment 4 does not give them that ability without parental consent.
Correct.
That is a decision that will be made between your child and the parent up until the age of 18.
We have a message from Kelly on Facebook. She says, no on 4. The wording is deceiving. Both have terrible wording, not defined, and will cause lawsuits. What do you think about that, Daniel, in terms of the potential for litigation? Is that just to be expected?
It's going to be expected anyway. I mean, you could draw up the language any way you want, and individuals who are pro-life or individuals who are against legalized cannabis or for Amendment 3 are still going to file lawsuits. I mean, that's going to be inevitable.
Doesn't the fact that the Florida Supreme Court has to sign off on the language in some ways prevent that from happening, or no?
No, I mean, it'll still be tried in court. But you're exactly right. A conservative, completely DeSantis-supported Florida Supreme Court has already signed off on this language. I mean, the language is legal. It's not as if it's not illegal. But I think the other thing here, which is really, really interesting to me, is you may recall when the Constitution Revision Commission placed a whole bunch of amendments on the ballot with the last time that they met. And, of course, that panel meets every 20 years to discuss changes to the Constitution. And they actually gave Floridians an amendment that said, do you want to ban offshore oil drilling and vaping inside? And nobody was walking around then saying, what do these two things have in common? How is this not vague? How is this not, completely nonsensical that you would basically be putting, both of these things in the same amendment? The language for 4 is, as Nancy suggested, it's very, very clear. You may not like the idea of a woman being able to choose. You may not like the idea of going back to what we've had previously for 50 years in the state of Florida. But in terms of ambiguity in the language, that just doesn't hold water for me.
We've got another question from Facebook. This is from Holly, and she says minors are allowed to have, under this law, allowed to have abortions without parental consent, just notification. Can you clarify what that provides for if this amendment were passed?
I have to look at the language exactly, but I believe it states explicitly that this does not change that element of our current law. It explicitly carves it out and says this
I'll give you a minute to look for that.
Yeah.
And Daniel, just to ask you, I mean, we know that polling suggests people support abortion rights nationally and on the state level. How much of this amendment is an effort to kind of animate voters, and how much of it is a reaction to Florida's 6-week abortion ban that's currently in place?
I mean, I think that obviously the 6-week abortion ban has been very much a catalyst for the Amendment 4 movement. I think that when you're really talking about going from 15 weeks down to 6 weeks, I mean, not to get into basic biology, but many people who are pregnant don't even realize that they're pregnant at 6 weeks. I mean, and let's just talk about this. This is something that I hear too, Anna, and I know this is a little bit of a pivot away that you've said. When we're talking about exceptions for rape, or specifically, how many cases do you know for rape that are convicted within 6 weeks of the accusation? To basically say you need to prove and you need to demonstrate that you were the victim of rape prior to receiving your. I mean, my goodness, the investigation doesn't even conclude in 6 weeks. Not to mention the process through the courts. So that whole idea of we've carved in this exception. It's not an exemption. I mean, it's not a practical exemption at all.
Well, and I think one concern that people who support Amendment 4 have raised is very often if you're talking about a young person who is pregnant for a non-consensual circumstance, very often it's a family member that's the perpetrator. And so, attempting to get someone to file a police report in that circumstance can be pretty complicated. Nancy?
So the exact language is, this initiative would not change the state legislature's authority to enact a law requiring the parents of a minor to be notified if their child is seeking an abortion, with exceptions that can be attained through a judicial waiver. And furthermore, this does not change any other aspect of Florida statute. So the requirement that a physician must administer either an abortion procedure or medication, that stands. The requirement of having 2 visits to a physician at least 24 hours apart, again, no other procedure requires this. That still stands. Everything else that is pointed out in Florida statute is not changed by this initiative. This initiative changes the legality of abortion up until viability, and making it illegal and criminalizing physicians will not eliminate abortions.
I see my producer sent language that's on the state website that says this amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. And so if this passes, Nancy, the legislature would still have that freedom to
absolutely
require that.
It's required.
And this is important to note. That could have happened if Amendment 4 actually said that, but it does not. That language is not contained within the amendment. Therefore, that legislation as it exists, Florida statute exists, it will stand.
I'm going to take a call from Judy in the Beaches. Good morning, Judy. Go ahead.
Good morning. My call is this, question is this. I think statistics and polls have shown that a majority of Floridians support this amendment across both lines and no party affiliates, Republicans, Democrats, by, the petitions that were signed. So what can Floridians do now to ensure that this amendment is passed and that once it's passed, that it isn't chipped away by our legislature? I can take my comments off the air. Thank you.
I'd say make sure you vote and take a bunch of your friends to vote if that's the way you feel, because that's really the only way is to really get spirited. I'm sure there's ways, if this was important to you, that you could get with the organizations who are supporting Amendment 4, including now, that there would be phone banking opportunities and door knocking opportunities and things along those lines that you can help spread the word. Sometimes some of the most powerful communication when it comes to politics is person-to-person communication. And if you're really if you're willing to see this cross the finish line, and to pass is to get activated.
Well, Daniel Cronrath, Nancy Staats, thank you both so much for being here. I know it's an issue that we'll be revisiting closer to November, but I appreciate all of your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ann.